So let's relight our chalice together, and let us say our unison affirmation. We are Unitarian Universalists. We light our chalice in faith, in hope, and in love. So I'm just sharing sort of a few opening words, notes, but one of the things, the place I actually want to begin today is what it feels like in 3 different spaces. Our coffee hour right now is abuzz with tables, including one of our families sharing the celebration of Nowruz, which just happened this week, and people sharing inspiration about many ways of getting involved in the church or getting involved in justice opportunities. And then the sanctuary is abuzz with choir members and bell ringers and others in the music program who are meeting to talk about their vision for our music program and what our hopes are in this time of transition, what seeds we want to plant, and what parts of the ministry want to continue to nourish and move forward. And so there were a lot of people between when I left the narthex and the sanctuary, and a lot of people in Fuller. I thought, will there be anyone in the budget meeting? And you're here, a fair number of people. So I think that I kind of want to begin by naming a truth, which is that when we talk about money and when we talk about our budget, we're talking about the resources that allow us to create the space of welcome and inspiration and connection that we create every Sunday, activities of justice, opportunities to mentor our children in the learning community, and that the buzzing going on all morning here is part of how the budget translates into life. And there's a lot of life going on this morning. So I want us to hold that, because I think that's an important thing. The second thing is that we have a lot of lay leaders that help tend the ministry of this congregation, and we ministers and staff partner with them. And so most of today's presentation will be coming from the finance team, and I will hand you over to them in a second. I want to paint a picture, though, just to name that a larger journey we're on together is to move towards what does sustainability look like for our congregation, and how do we grow from there. And so we are a different size congregation than you were, let's say, 10 years ago, for example. And so there are ways that we've had to make some trimming that is challenging, and paradoxically, we're also growing in new people. This family sharing about Nowruz, they weren't even a part of our congregation in 2024. They came at the end of 2024 and loved what they saw so much that they wanted to be a part of it. Now they're a part of the Shower Project, they're a part of the learning community, and they're a part of our congregation. And that's just one example of many. So we're both growing and wrestling with the fact that we're a different size than we once were. And so one of the things we're trying to figure out is what sustainability looks like and what commitment to our values looks like, so that we can continue to care for our building, our staff, our ministries, our people, through the resources that we have, which is really what our budget is about. So to remind you of 2 things. The good news is that we thought 1.4 for the annual fund drive was an ambitious goal for the congregation. And it was. We were 120,000 shy of it. But the match absolutely got us to that level. And where we really are aiming towards is more like 1.5 for the annual fund drive. And the employee retention tax credit was part of what we hoped would get us to that point this year and next year. And it hasn't come in yet. So we've had a lot of conversations about what to do about that. And what you'll see is the finance team moving towards a concerted effort around stewardship, working with the staff and the ministers in the year ahead, and also a lower reliance on the ERTC, because if it doesn't come in, we don't want to, we decided the glass is half full, but not full. Is that a good way to put it? To some degree, the consensus was, if we're expecting something, not to expect nothing, and yet, and I want you to hear me this, it's been a year and a half. So we also are nervous about it. So there's some opportunities to try to make up the difference between some stewardship and then also planning on less. So we'll let you know if that changes. And there are lots of wonderful things that are happening, being funded, and I'll mention one. I hope you've noticed the additional adult programming that we've been offering, and we're going to continue to expand in that way. That was a big request during the community conversations in my end of my first year here. And the second thing is our social media campaigns are on the rise. So if you are on Instagram or Facebook, you're going to notice that. There are a couple of us working hard on that, and I want to lift up Isabella Utrecht, who's a significant part of the communications team and is doing a great job. And I could lift lots of folks up, but I'm going to stop there because it's not a minister's update. It is a finance team and board budget update. But I'm so glad you're here, and a reminder, every dollar translates into life in this community. So thank you for all you give in terms of time, talent, and treasure.
Good afternoon. I'm Roger Robinson. I'm the treasurer of the church. I will be giving the presentation with help of other members of the Finance Committee and the ET. Next slide, please. Welcome everybody here, and also for those of you who are online. What we're going to do is we will first review the budgeting process at our church. We'll then go over this year's budget and then next year's budget as a comparison to this year's budget. And then we'll have questions and answers. I want to mention that this budget was created by a number of people participating. The executive team, which is made up of Reverend Allison and Catherine Esty, our church administrator, Finance Committee, myself, Linda Craig, right here, Bob Bonner, right here, and the accounting advisory team, Linda Craig and Joanne Four. From the congregation, we also have people who are regular attendees who give wonderful advice to the Finance Committee. That's Deb Dion. Thank you, Deb. Ed McLaren, Karen Shawcross, Tony Obst, and Dave Hoffman. Next slide, please. At the last forum, I introduced, or I went through the steps that we're going to go through, that we do for creating the budget and for informing the congregation of the budget and how we're going to go to approvals. And so we are at step 3 right now, the informational congregant meeting in March. What's going to happen after this meeting is that the Finance Committee that met a few days ago and approved the budget that I'm presenting today, we are presenting today, the Finance Committee will recommend that budget to the board at the board meeting on April 2nd. Then on April 13th, we're going to come back for another session with the congregants. It's going to be in this place. And go over it again for those of you who either were so fascinated by what I talked about today, you want to hear it again, reprise it, or for those who haven't had a chance to see it. So then the final step is, of course, everybody votes on it. All right, next slide, please. I want to start out before I dig into the numbers here to mention points of interest. As Reverend Allison said, this is an optimistic budget because Finance Committee is an optimistic kind of group. And we say, let's not sit on our laurels. Let's see what we can do. What can we achieve as a congregation? So I'll get into the details later. Using reserves. So you will note a very important thing that's like it could slide by and nobody noticed this. So I want to bring it to everybody's attention. In order to balance the budget for at least the past 10 years, we've had to draw from reserves. And we've done that every single year for 10 years, if not longer. And, well, the well is running dry. So we worked really hard. The Finance Committee and the ET worked very hard so that this year, the budget, for the first time in a long time, more than a decade, will not use any reserves. That's significant. Yes, please. Please. And then Reverend Allison also brought up the ERTC, Employment Retention Tax Credit. We'll get into that more later. Okay, next slide. Just to review the budget for this year, I'm going to hit some highlights. And we'll have questions and answers at the end of this. And so if you want to know a little detail, Catherine will provide that. I'll just hit some highlights that were, as Reverend Allison mentioned before, our pledge level was 1.4 million, and that's 64% of how we get revenue. Then we're very blessed with the plate offerings at $54,000. I think that needs to be recognized because that is something that we can't predict how many people are going to give, but that's a significant amount of money. I want to move down to reserves. I want to point out that $100,000 is in the budget for this year. We're going to be drawing from the reserves again this year to balance the budget. So total revenue of $2,194,340. Next slide, please. So next year. First of all, you can see from the previous slide to this slide, many more line items. And I'll explain that as we go along. The first thing I want to mention is that top line, pledging. Remind you that this year the goal is and was 1.4 million. And Reverend Allison made point of saying we're going for 1.5 this next year. I have 1.45 down. What the difference between the two is, I'm not sure if everybody's aware of this, but not everybody does or can fulfill their pledge. And so every year that there's a name for it, you could call it write down or some other term, where we never expect 100% of that 1.4 or 1.45. Many times it's 5% less, which on a $1.4 million budget is a lot of money. So just keep everybody in mind what's going on. So I'm trying to explain very aptly that The goal is going to be 1.45 million. We're raising it by 50,000 because we feel we're going to get 50,000 more because, as Reverend Allison said, we're growing. And so we also have started up again a stewardship committee that will be keeping in touch with the congregation and encourage participation monetarily and other ways of resources to help the church. What was that plate number last time? The plate number last time was 53,000. We're moving it up to 68,000, which is another 15 grand. And that's part of this optimism that we're feeling about the church. There are more people. There are givers who really feel devoted to the church and are giving generously. 2 items down here, interest income, ERTC. So let me talk about the interest income first. Without getting too detailed, we have 2 members of the board, Linda Craig and Bob Bonner, who noticed that we have a large amount of monies in the bank that we're not getting interest. And they said, you know, it'd be good if we could get interest from this money. We're talking about more than $1 million here. So they worked it out so that now we're going to start getting interest to the tune of at least $25,000 this year. Thank you, Linda and Bob. The next thing is the ERTC. So as Reverend Allison mentioned, we've been, sitting around waiting for this money to come in. And it's interesting, it's kind of like a psychological difference in how you look at the money. Some people have said, well, we haven't gotten it for the past couple of years, so I guess we're never going to get it. Other people are saying, it's kind of like, I'm saying this, it's like, no, we have a higher chance of getting it now than we did before. So, as Reverend Allison said, we had 100 grand in there for it, but we decided, maybe what if we don't get it again? Then we have to find 100 grand. So now we've cut that line item down to 50. So if we don't get it again, we only have to scramble for 50,000, which seems like still a lot of money. Okay, so what are we going to do about this ERTC? We've been waiting around, cooling our heels, and the thought came, great idea came from the congregation. Well, you should contact your legislators. Contact the state senate, not state, but the federal senators and our congresswomen, and write them and say, hey, what's going on? So you will see shortly a call for everybody to contact your politicians and say, please let us know what's going on. So that later, Jimmy. And then I want to reiterate, because I love it so much, the reserves. We're not calling upon any reserves. Next slide, please. Okay, now let's talk about the expenses. This is this year's expenses. And I don't know that I have anything to say other than boring numbers. I'll let you sort of look it over and make note to yourself. If you have a question about it, well, you can ask later. No, the more interesting thing is, next slide, please. Next year's expenses. So what's going on? What are the changes? Well, first of all, next year's expenses includes is 1.52 million. And if you remember the number that you just saw before, perhaps, that's $80,000 less. We're going to, I will have Catherine talk about the makeup of that 80,000 toward the end of the presentation and how that's happening. But you can see we're dropping professional services by an amount, guest ministers by an amount, Utilities, as everybody knows, because you also heat and cool your houses, those increases, those are costing more, so we also have to take into account that. And then web services, same thing, increase in money. Catherine, be so kind. Would you talk about the payroll, the reduction in programs, and anything else you feel like it? Yeah. Okay. And then other changes that are not as significant. So we end up with a $2,234,500 budget. All right. Next slide, please. I'll invite Linda to come up to talk about this more detailed slide. Linda?
So we didn't want to talk about the budget without putting it in context for you. And so what the slide shows is our statement of financial position at 2 points in time. January 31, which is our most recent accounting monthly financial statements, and 6/30/24, which is the end of our last fiscal year and is the statement that we have reviewed by outside accountants. But before I go into the details on this, I want to mention just a couple things that Roger didn't mention that caught my eye. In the revenue side, you may have noticed that it said auction 50,000 and that was a change from prior years. The auction has done remarkably well for us, as you all know, each year. But sometimes that money that the auction raises has gone to something that's off budget. This year, the auction committee and the ET worked out a situation where the expenses that they're going to be providing the auction money for is also going to offset part of the budget. So we get to count it in a different way than we have in the past. And the other thing is that it mentioned shower project at $20,000. The shower project costs more than that and has been successful at raising more grant money than that. And they have decided that $20,000 of the grant money that they have received, and this is the committee that works on the shower project, should go to the church for overhead and sextons and so on. So that's essentially a contribution from the shower project to the church budget, which is wonderful. In terms of what the statement of financial position shows us, the cash and other investments in the church at 131 was $1.79 million. I'm going to read these numbers to you because I know that they're sometimes hard to see from the back. So 1.8 million, say, and at the reviewed financial statement year end 6/30/24, it was 1.81 million. So we're just down 38,000 in terms of cash and investments compared to 6/30/24. The receivables and prepaids are mostly pledges receivable. Prepaids are things like insurance and deposits that we will use at some point in the future. And those pledges receivable are not adjusted from month to month. So this number of the $7,000 difference should really be disregarded. Fixed assets are our buildings and our land and equipment. And generally accepted accounting principles does kind of a weird thing with fixed assets. It requires us to state those things at cost. So this is no reflection of the value of what we have in our building and land. And then you take that cost and you write it off over a period of time. So each year there is a cost to our financial statements of depreciation. But that is not a cash cost, and so it does not reduce the amount of money we have in the bank. So total assets at 131 are 7.48 million compared to 7.69 million and $200,000 less. But notice that 163 of that is the depreciation, which I mentioned doesn't affect our cash and investments. For liabilities, at January 31st, we have $84,000 in current liabilities. That's mostly accrued wages and is a number that's pretty typical from month to month. At 6/30/24, though, we had $240,000 worth of liabilities. And the big part of that was legal fees and severance pay for the music transition. So we have paid that off, and that's part of what causes the cash reduction that we've seen here. So we have $156,000 less in liabilities than we had at 6/30. The deferred lease and the solar note, when we put our solar panels on, we made a deal with Clean Power Cooperative, and we owe $20,000 yet for our solar panels. But this $350,000 number, $330,000 of it is money that has been on our books kind of forever, because Outside In prepaid us for 60 years of the facilities that they rent from us. And so we write that off at $9,500 a year. So this is deferred lease money, which doesn't affect our financial position really, except to show up as a liability on our books. So our total liabilities at 1/31 were $435,000 compared to $593,000 at 6/30. We've paid down $158,000 of that. And that means our net assets at January 31st are $7 million compared to $7.1 million at 6/30. We're substantially holding our own. And each month where we collect more in plates and collect more in pledges and so on helps. So it would be very nice if we could end up this year in an even cash position. I don't know whether we're going to be able to do that or not. Several of you have asked for more information about our financial statements and financial position as you get ready to vote on the budget. And I just want to mention that the 6/30/24 reviewed financial statements will very soon be completed, and that we'll plan a link on the website to those and make sure that you have that information so that you know how to access that before you do the budget. And also today, Catherine brought along from January 31st a page that we'd like each of you to take if you'd like, which is the actual versus budget income statement through January 31st, 2025. So it shows our revenue and expenses compared to what was budgeted last year. Happy to answer questions. Always, we're happy to invite you to come to Finance Committee meetings. And if you do have any questions that you'd like to email to us, you can write to the board's email, and we'll be sure that the Finance Committee gets back to you with questions. Or I'll be around after the meeting, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Wonderful. And thanks for pointing out the shower project and the what was the other thing? Auction. Those, as Linda mentioned, those have been off budget. I think that's the term, right? On budget, off budget, off budget. Thank you. The nice thing about bringing those in-house is, one, we're keeping track of that money, which is what we should do historically and accounting-wise. And then we have a history of that, which is important too. Okay, cool. Church goals. Reverend Allison already went through a lot of this, and I want to bring up just a couple of detail items. What we want to do through staff and other resources from volunteers is to enhance our website and social media so that we can get the word out. Get the word out the way people learn things in this world, for people to know about us and how good we are. So therefore, growing membership and friendship and recruiting volunteers and equipped leaders. And then promote generously, too, with your time and your money. All right, next slide, please. We have some future events. The next, as I mentioned before, we're going to have yet another one of these on April 13th. It's going to be at noon. It's going to be here. So come one, come all. On April 27th, the ballots will be mailed. That will include financial information, too, that the ET's putting together as we speak. April 30th and May 4th will be proposed bylaw changes that Julia will explain. April 30th will be here, and not, but online too, yeah. And then May 4th is only Zoom, right? Okay. And then May 18th when the ballots are due. Vote early, vote often. That's what I always say. Okay, now, ready for questions and hopefully answers. All right, Jim. Let me do this. Hang on, don't talk. Hello? 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 Can you hear me?
Okay. Reverend Allison, you mentioned the ERTC. It's a federal credit, right? Yeah. And that we should go after our congressional delegation, try to get support for that. But I think there's a problem because Trump has been writing these executive orders that have been canceling a distribution of monies. And so it doesn't matter what the Congress does when he's delaying money that the Congress has appropriated and signing these executive orders, and the federal agencies are disappearing that are supposed to administer them. So that's a real problem. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, I was treasurer about 45 years ago when I first moved to Portland. And even before that, there's a guy by the name of Peter Jarvis who was a partner of mine at Stoll Reeves. His wife, Ann Jarvis, was a member of the church. I don't know if any of you remember these people. I'm seeing some nodding heads. And Ann Jarvis recruited me to work on John Pangborn from Freightliner was the treasurer. And he called me at Stoll Reeves one day and said, I want you to work on something about finances at the First Unitarian Church, because I know you're a member. And I said, I'm a lawyer, not an accountant. I don't know anything about this financial stuff. He said, I don't buy it. And so he put me to work on addressing reserve funds where people had put in their wills that their money would go to the First Unitarian Church but could only be used for certain things and nothing else. So don't we have money sitting in these reserve funds that is dedicated to certain monies, certain expenses, which we should be getting the benefit of? It's beyond what we're budgeting, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's a plus.
That's a plus.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the first one is a negative. Trump's going to screw everything up. And the second one is a plus. So those are my points.
Thanks, Jim. Yes. We recognize that God knows what Trump's doing in Washington. We also know that other organizations have been receiving their ERTC money recently. So we're hopeful that we will get in there before it ends. Other questions? Yes, here?
Oh.
There? Whatever, Julia. Whatever you want to do.
I'm Jan.
Hi, Jan.
What is the quantity of funds that are in the reserves?
Quantity, Catherine.
First of all, Jim is right that we do have some designated funds that, for example, are used for intern minister, women in ministry. Right, exactly, thank you. So the situation is I think, both Roger and Allison referred to in terms of the status of the reserves. If we do not receive the $100,000 of the ERTC for this current year that ends at the end of June 30th, our reserve funds that aren't designated will need to be gone to come in balancing the budget. So we're looking at, I mean, right now, you know, we probably, I'd have to go back and actually look at my Januaries now, but we would be, okay, Linda's got the, thank you. So we're looking at what Linda, yeah, which was just on the slide that Linda shared, a little over $500,000. But again, some of those are the, yeah, without the donor restrictions. With the donor restrictions. That's the with donor restrictions. But in terms of money that we can bring over to help balance the budget, we are looking at that $100,000 worth and more. You may or may not remember that the budget that we're in now, which the congregation voted on last May, actually showed bringing over $166,000 worth of reserves to balance our budget. And as Rogers pointed out, the budget that we're looking at for the coming year, which hasn't quite been approved, it has to go to the board next, is not using any reserves, which we're excited about. And we, on a monthly basis, are required through our policies to set aside a certain amount of money to go into what we just call the contingency fund. So if, in fact, at the end of the year we are in a deficit, we will have money that's been set aside. I think, let me give you your sheet back here. I think, so that's just kind of a sort of a hazy answer to your question. I mean, we've actually, as Roger mentioned, for many years have used reserves to balance the budget and then have not had to spend it all. So I do want to mention that. We have not every single year spent reserves, but we've needed at least to, for the sake of bringing in a balanced budget, done that. As long as I have the mic, do you want me to talk about, you had asked about the, how it is that our payroll looks different and lower for the coming year. I think one of the main thing to mention is that we will not be having an intern minister in the coming year. We felt that that was an expense that, at least for the coming year, needed to go, and I just want to mention that's going to be extra work for Allison and Tom, but to let you know that that's part of the reduction. We're also at, for the budget year that we're in now, we actually had budgeted for a communications coordinator, and Nikki left us then at the beginning of this fiscal year, but we'd already passed the budget with her salary in there. That is going away, but again, as Allison mentioned, and I think Roger did, Isabelle Utrecht, whose main job is accounting and stewardship and database, has kind of on their own picked up a lot of this new posting to Instagram, to Facebook, putting our visibility out there. I think especially because so many of us, including myself, are the gray hairs that we're really looking to reach out to folks that pay attention to Instagram, and that might bring them to church. I also want to mention, again, we're thankful for that $20,000 from the shower project, but just a reminder, that was not just a grant to us. We have staff time, a lot of staff time, facilities that go into making the shower project work, and so essentially they're saying, this is money that we should be giving back to the church because, you know, we've actually put staff time and facilities time into that. I think we're also, many of you, at least in this group, know that Northwest Academy is literally on a month-to-month situation now, and we're working with them. They're very interested in having a lease I mean, they've even actually said out loud 10 years, but we're probably looking at a 5-year lease. And at our recent Finance Committee meeting, I think the thought is, let's get a 1 year in place now and then worry about the longer term. So that's an approach we're going to take. And the other thing that, again, I think many of you in this room know, that Outside In is moving out of that freestanding house that's between the church office and our the Buchanan building, and so we're going to be working on what to do about that. So those were all of the notes I had. I don't know if there was anything else that people.
Good. Yeah, I failed to give a shout out on the revenue side of things. Once again, we're very fortunate to receive $100,000 from the foundation.
Yay!
And thank you, foundation, for being so generous to the church. I want to, yeah.
Well, let's give other folks a chance here.
Right.
We've got Art Unger wanted to speak here. Oh, okay, all right, then I'm going to give it to Art after that.
Okay. Yes. You want the whole story? How much time we got?
It's pretty long.
Yeah, the short version. We had insurance for years and years through Church Mutual, which was giving us a wonderful deal, we assumed. And it was a wonderful deal. It was only about $20,000 a year. And then last year, they announced to us they didn't want to insure us anymore. We said, huh? They said, yeah, we just don't want to. They said, well, can you give us another year? They said, nah, we don't want to do it. So we started scrambling. And Andy Wilson's here, and he and a few others worked on finding some place else. And I'm telling you, I was part of that process, and it was difficult. We went to many different sources, and the only thing we could come up with was a policy from a company who doesn't normally do churches, who wanted to charge. Bear in mind, we were paying $20,000 to Church Mutual. They said, yeah, sure, we'll do it. $125,000 a year. We said, okay, let's continue searching. So we did, and we found another company that does do churches, and with a very good agent, local agent, which we didn't have through Church Mutual. And so we have full coverage, buildings, grounds, liability, and no, cannot do earthquake.
Prohibitively expensive.
Yeah. I mean, we could, but we don't have the money for it.
Earthquake.
And so it's gone from 20 to 50, which is, of course, a big jump, but a lot better than 125. And also we learned that the 50 is more in the range of what we should have been paying to begin with. So we feel good about that.
If that's not working, people online can't hear. This one will work.
This one works. So we're not going to have an intern next year, and yet we have these reserve funds which are designated. So is it a question of finance, or is it insufficient funds in the reserve that's designated for intern?
Try this again. I turned it off. Good question, Art. So again, I don't have the January statements in front of me, and in doing the budget, we have used a fair amount this year of the intern minister and women in ministry to supporting Danielle here. So we are at a point where, without wiping it out, which we really don't want to do, we don't have enough to actually support a full-time intern in that. So good question, appropriate one. I don't know whose hand was up.
Telling you, Catherine, keep it, because you're going to end up answering.
I was curious.
Speak right into it. So
I was curious, the cash and investments amount, 1.7 million, does that include the foundation money, or is that separate?
That is separate.
Great.
Yep.
Good to hear.
I have 2 questions. I know that we have a fund for congregants who are in an emergency situation. How much is that? How large is that fund?
That's a Catherine question.
again, I don't track every fund online. I know we have money that we, usually every December, we invite congregants to donate to that. So, we have probably a few thousand in it right now.
That's about it, only a few thousand, okay. The other question is, in terms of income from congregants, are you finding it a difference between people who attend services in person versus those who attend services online?
That's a really good question. I wish I could answer that. We don't have the capacity, that is the amount of staff to be able to make that connection, to do that study at the moment. So.
And also just to add, Roger, that we don't track necessarily, we're not tracking who's online unless they let us know. We don't have a way of going in and getting people's IP addresses.
Yeah, same thing for people who are in attendance in person.
So not to say anything different than what was just said, because I don't have something different to say, just to add a nuance, is that one of the things that we do here is that people who are part of the congregation, when they're at home or traveling and they're able to stay connected, it actually does deepen their relationship with us. And then a lot of times when people, just this morning, and I could say that a lot of Sundays, someone came with great exuberance because, of course, maybe they're online right now, because that person knows me because we've been together in worship, but today was the first time that I met them. But I didn't, usually someone's not there for the first time going, oh my gosh, Linda, can I give you a hug? The services have been so meaningful these last, so people come in with a different connection. And the third thing I'll say, because this is actually like, let's get together and have a meeting about this, across the entire denomination and really beyond Unitarian Universalism, people are talking about how do you convert people who might be online, almost more like, I don't want to use the word subscribers, but then I just did, to really feeling connected to the community. And so this is a larger and very good conversation, and it's not one of the goals that was up there, but it is one of our goals for the year ahead, and this year, is how do we connect with the people online and build community online. So we've been planting some seeds in that direction. If you're interested in this topic, come talk to me afterwards. So I was chair of the board of the Church of the Larger Fellowship, which is exclusively online, so I spent 9 years having this conversation and have some thoughts about it, but that's it, sorry.
Ruth Robinson. It would be very helpful if all of the restricted funds could be printed out and distributed at a meeting like this. I know the intern fund was initially formed with a bequest, and if we're finding out that we're getting to the end of it, maybe we ought to be soliciting more input to some of these restricted funds. So I'd like to make that request.
That's a great idea, Ruth. Catherine?
Yeah, absolutely easy to do. And for people who actually kind of like to get on the internet, the board posts its board packet every single month, and every single month the list of those accounts is in there. But having a printout, I think, is fine, Ruth. I think that's a good suggestion.
May I add to that When you go to the financial statements that are in the board packet, the monthly financial statements, you will see 2 statements of financial position. There is a summarized one that doesn't list all those reserve accounts, and then there is a complete one that shows all of them. And I also want to mention that Roger, our treasurer Roger, is a task force guy, and he's got a task force on the reserves. So you might want to say more about that.
Yeah.
Hey, Linda?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I think we have 8 task forces so far in the Finance Committee, and I am Mr. Task Force. And one of them is restricted and non-restricted reserves. And Linda's on that, amongst others who are in the Finance Committee. And it's a matter of housekeeping and doing a history of restricted reserves to see, well, what are the goals of these people who have donated to this line? Yeah, it's a long list. So we're working on that to bring it up to date so that we are more secure about making decisions to use the money because we know what the guidelines are for each line item.
Okay, did anybody else have a question? Yeah? Oh, sorry, my voice is doing its thing. Anybody else have a question? Okay.
I've mentioned this before at other meetings that maybe some of you have heard about. I've been working with John in the office, and I've talked with Reverend Allison about this and Reverend Tom and others. We're going to do or at least I hope we're going to do what I call the 30-30 event, which is 30 years ago when I was the board chair, it just so happened that we did a lot of things. We retrofit this building seismically. We did the outside-in deal. We just did a lot of things 30 years ago. And so we want to have this meeting where we gather together all the people that were in the leadership 30 years ago and talk about what we did 30 years ago and what our vision was for 30 years later, which is now. And then get the people who are in the leadership now, which would be Reverend Allison, Leslie Pohl Cosby as our board chair, and the people that are on the leadership now, and talk about what their vision is or where we're going to be 30 years from now. So I hope that we can have this meeting and talk about all this, because it'll put all of this in a context of where we want this church to be and where all these monies are going to go and what they're going to be spent on and not spent on, et cetera. So that's my comment.
And Roger, do you want to mention the strategic planning that we have that might be instead of that?
As a matter of fact, Jim, we do have a strategic plan group that's going to be looking at the history of the church and looking at the future of the church, too.
I have a quick answer to that. So we're starting this spring, so very soon, May, June. We'll be looking, look, someone just very generously gave $50, which if other people feel inspired by the financial situation to do that, I'm here. Catherine's witnessing it.
I'm here.
I like to be witnessed when someone hands me cash. This spring, we'll be looking at sort of the history with a focus on the last 30 years or so of the congregation and also what was going on in the world in Portland to understand where we are so that we can project where we want to go accurately, the roadmap. In the year ahead, we'll be moving towards mission, vision, and then strategic planning work. And so that's the shortest answer. But it is, the board and the ET is very conscious of the need to do that. It's been a long time, and we've done some efforts, like today's music opportunity, to try to not wait until we were ready for a fuller process. But really, it's time for a fuller process. So more to come, and some of you may have heard me mention this in services as well. Budgets should be attached to those plans with a longer horizon, and that's where we're headed. So,
good. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? well. Ah. Thank you all for attending.